So now that we have things prepared for the laser engraver to etch in our design using raster art, we're also going to take a look at how to create the tool pathing using vector art so that we can cut out designs, cut out forms that we might use to build models or pieces and things like that. The raster art laser etching will not actually cut work out, it will just burn in imagery. So using vector allows us to create shapes and paths the machine can follow easily, clearly, and allow us to cut out anything we want and build things in whatever manner we kind of really want to create. So we're going to open up a new Illustrator file. We're using Adobe Illustrator. That is a vector software. You can use other software such as Inkscape or Corel Draw. There's a handful of them. We're going to use Adobe Illustrator. It's industry standard and we can keep this moving. So I'm going to actually file new for Adobe Illustrator and create a new file. Similar to what we did with Photoshop, we're going to make a 12 by 12 inch artboard that will represent the wood that we're going to be laser cutting on. And this, in fact, is actually probably more important in Illustrator than it is in Photoshop. Because again, we're using a 12 by 12 inch piece of birch plywood. So we have inches here, 12 by 12. We're going to title this LaserCutter project. We're going to hit create and it's going to give us our 12 by 12. Now we can zoom in and zoom out, same as Photoshop, using the Z key and holding Alt Option to zoom out so we can get a good idea of our actual work area and our piece of material that we're going to be cutting out. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually bring in our JPEG, our raster art. We're going to bring it into Illustrator so that we can see kind of where our imagery is going to be placed and kind of work around that. So here we have our JPEG that we exported from Photoshop. I'm going to bring that right in. You can see the scale is a little off, so we may have got a few of the settings wrong when we exported from Photoshop. Most likely it exported at a lower resolution than we created it, but you can fix that either in Photoshop and export it again, or in this case I'm not super particular about the size, so I'm just going to scale it down. And again, I'm going to hold shift so that I don't create this squashed or stretched appearance. So we have a good size circle for the image of the house that we want, and we're going to move it in here. Now remember, this is 12 inches by 12 inches, 1 foot by 1 foot. So even though it might look like 4 or 5 inches by 4 or 5 inches, this actually represents a foot by a foot. So this is image is going to be kind of big when we're done with it. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do is create a new layer for us to create the line work and the pathing work in Illustrator. This is going to tell our machines where, excuse me, where to go, what lines to follow while they're actually blasting through the board with a laser, which is pretty cool. So we're going to create a new layer for that. So our layers panel will look like two little diamonds on top of each other, two little pieces of paper stacked. If you don't see this, or you don't see any of the panels I have up here, it's really easy to get those. Everything is under window. The window pull down has all your panels. So right now we're worried about layers, so you can turn that on if you don't see it already. Now you also should be familiar with this format, the panels on your right, the tools on your left, and a bunch of drop downs on the top that deal with details and more sort of special operations. Illustrator is formatted very similar to Photoshop, so as you begin to learn one, you'll get much more of a command on the other. Now it does differ in that you're building shapes and creating lines and paths, so you're no longer necessarily manipulating pixels. So you won't be coming in with your selection tool and clicking on a pixel and selecting a bunch of other pixels. This software doesn't really work that way. And the more you use it, the more you'll understand it. What you will be doing a lot of is creating shapes and manipulating or moving things around. So again, I'm going to lock this layer with the photograph on it, and I'm going to create a new layer by pushing this little square with the corner so that I have a nice new layer for me to draw on. And what am I going to do? I'll first show you how to create a circle so we can cut this circle out and make our coaster. Simplest project ever, but we're actually going to go a little more advanced than that, but I'll show you. So we grab our circle tool. We can click drag a circle or an ellipse. If I hold shift, it will be a perfect circle. If I hold spacebar, I can move this around and place it where I think is in the center. Now, it might appear as if my photograph disappeared, but it actually hasn't. It's just underneath this. When you create a shape in Illustrator, it gives you two main properties, and those properties are on this little color palette. It gives you a fill property, which is white, and an outline or a stroke, which right now is black. So if I move this circle over here, you'll see that it's not actually just covering this up, but it's actually a white circle with a black outline. Now I can change this fill color to anything I want. But for now, we only want to see the path, which is the outline here. So I'm actually going to hit this little none button and have it none for its fill. So now I can see, and let's zoom in with the Z button a little bit. I can see what's going on here. I have a path, right? And it says path when you hover over it, and an image. So right now, with my laser project, if I exported this correctly and brought it to the machine, I could essentially etch in this photograph and then come back in with the machine and cut out this circle. Okay, now the circle's black, so it will actually etch that circle also before it cuts it. If you don't want it to etch, you can hit none for color. Now it might look like it disappears, but you'll watch if I hover over, you'll see the edge pop up, and if I click on this, or if I hover over here, you'll see, boom, the path shows up. This path exists. Whether or not we have a stroke and a fill attached to this path exists. So be careful when you bring this to Illustrator. This right now might look like there's nothing going on except an image, but this circle here exists, so it will cut a circle in your wood. Okay? For the vector art, the fill and the stroke, it doesn't matter what the color is, as long as there's a path there, even if it looks hidden, that laser cutter is going to cut that out. So right now we have a coaster being cut out, and it's a little wobbly because it's not centered, and which is really frustrating to me. So I'm going to show you a quick fix on how to center that up, and we'll keep moving. So here we have our, it's not up here right now, so we'll go to our window, pull down, grab Align. Here we have our Align palette. This allows us to center things, and center things this way. Whoops. Oh, I have my photograph layer locked. I will unlock that, select both of these, and now we can center it, center it. I'll lock that picture again. Now you see a nice, perfectly aligned imagery inside of a circle. I'm going to turn the stroke back on just so I can see what's happening. And this, if we were to bring it to the laser cutter now, would allow us to etch an image and then cut it out. Now also, I'm going to show you this right now, and we'll talk about this a little bit later also. This is bad placement. If you're actually placing this, what you would want is to move this to the corner of your board so that you have this free space to cut something else, etch something else, or the wood that you'll have in the end is free. Okay? So you can do another project on it. Last but not least, I will point out to you a couple things that kind of get, can be kind of messed up sometimes. The outline to this image is here. The outline to this circle is here. When we have both of them selected, we'll see that the furthest outline point is here. When this gets brought into the laser cutter, this is going to shift up to the top corner so that it saves as much white space as possible in the top left. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, nothing for this. However, this is our vector view. When we look at our raster view, the computer is only going to see the raster art. So it's only going to see this. And furthermore, it won't see this vector outline that gets placed around the circle. So that means that when it trims the white space for the etching, this circle is going to go here. So there's no white space here or here. Where's your cutting circle going to go? Here. What's going to happen? It's going to etch this image out, and then it's going to cut this circle, and you're going to have an offset image that gets cut out. You don't want that. So what you should do to avoid this is have making sure that your image here, this black line, is slightly larger than this bounding box. And if you can't have that happen, you put a safety rectangle around it. So it will trim to this rectangle and not to this. If you need help understanding that, let me know and I'll help you out with that process. But that is critical when you're lining things up. Next, we're going to look at how to do some complicated shapes and some of the commands in here to help you make a better design instead of just a lame coaster.